We're fortunate to have Dr. Siva Vaidyanathan. Whatever. I'm very sensitive to the pronunciation of last name. Vaidyanathan.
Yes.
Who I've just discovered is a fellow refugee from Western New York. And he even has the Buffalo Bills hat to prove it. Siva is an American cultural historian and media scholar. He's the Robertson Professor of Media Studies at the University of Virginia. He's a permanent columnist at The Guardian and Slate, frequent contributor on media and cultural issues in various periodicals, including the Chronicle of Higher Education, New York Times Magazine, The Nation. He directs the Center for Media and Citizenship at the University of Virginia, which produces, among other things, the Virginia Quarterly Review. And he's the author of several books. Most recently, it's Anti-Social Media. So if you're interested in learning more about this subject, it's an in-depth, thoughtful, comprehensive assessment of the social media environment. So I would recommend it. Let me start with a quotation from your book, which may capsulize everything. You say, if you wanted to build a machine that would distribute propaganda to millions of people, distract them from important issues, energize hatred and bigotry, erode social trust, undermine journalism, foster doubts about science, and engage in massive surveillance all at once, you'd make up something a lot like Facebook. Does that summarize the
Thank you very much, everybody. That's pretty much all we need. Yeah.
I mean, you talk about, among other things in your book, about social media, particularly Facebook, being a surveillance machine and a disinformation machine. What do you mean by that?
Well, also an emotional machine, right?
An attention machine.
Yeah, an attention machine, right? So it fundamentally, Facebook, and I think this applies to most of the other major social media platforms, and let me just break that down for you. Facebook has nearly 4 billion users around the world. There are only 8 billion humans on Earth. There has never been anything else that has reached half of humanity, any other media technology that has reached half of humanity. So that's a pretty stunning thing. And I think sometimes we lose sight of that because our own experience of Facebook and other social media platforms is always based on just the people we interact with and our own phones, right? So we tend to lose sight of the various ways it has infiltrated people's lives in many places and in many ways, in much deeper ways than the United States, right? So it's a much bigger part of daily life in places like Cambodia and Myanmar, India. It is, so for instance, I'm going a little bit off tangent here, in India, which has 1.3 billion people, the largest country in the world, 1/3 of them are on Facebook. So when Mark Zuckerberg wakes up in the morning, he thinks about India before he thinks about the United States, because that is where his biggest market is, that is where the biggest growth is, that is where the biggest potential for revenue comes from. Because of course, like most adept corporate leaders, he's thinking 10 years in the future. He's not really thinking about this quarter. So that's important to remember, right? So much of what we talk about, we really have to continue to think about as a global story and not just an American story. If anything, Facebook peaked in the United States around 2011 and has remained at a steady state. But Meta, the company that runs Facebook, also has Instagram, which is the second biggest social media platform in the world, with about 1.6 billion users. It also owns WhatsApp, which is one of the top 6. It has about 1.2 billion users. So those three alone, along with Facebook Messenger, constitutes the vast majority of social media use. On the heels of Meta is an Alphabet/Google subsidiary called YouTube, which you all know, which functions in some ways as social media, but it does it's basically a video delivery platform. But it has a social aspect to it. We often include it in there. And it pulls on the same advertising for revenue. And then you have the notorious TikTok. And TikTok is a company run by a Chinese company, or is a service run by a Chinese company called ByteDance. And ByteDance is very close to the government of the People's Republic of China. Its secrets are closely held. In fact, its very powerful AI-driven algorithms are considered state security secrets by the Chinese government. And so, and we might talk about this later, as we face in this country an impending shutdown of TikTok, basically no one will be able to use TikTok in this country after January. The big beneficiary of that is Meta, right, is Zuckerberg's companies. But the idea here was, of the bill, was to get TikTok sold to an American company. They're not selling, and nobody's buying. So we're basically going to lose TikTok in this country. Okay, so that's the big picture of all of this. Much what I have to say about Facebook also applies to TikTok and also applies to a lesser degree to some of the insurgent text-based social media services that resemble the old Twitter. But that's a whole other story, and those all have very low numbers. Twitter itself in its heyday never made the top 10 global social media platforms. It had outsized influence because of a few celebrities, one of whom happened to become president for a while. So that's just to give you a bigger picture of it. But they are all in the business of capturing and holding our attention, and they're all designed to keep us coming back. They're all designed to give us that little bit of itch, like, oh, I need to check. I need to see what happened. Did I get some likes on my post? Did someone like my joke? Did someone like the photo of my puppy, right? All of that sits in the back of your mind and urges you to go forward. And when you're scrolling on these services, everything is designed to get you to move on to the next item, the next item, the next item. Because the more time you spend with these programs, with these platforms, the more likely you are to click on an ad, and that's how they generate revenue. So that's the basic formula of it. And therefore, how do you hook people? Well, you give them something with a high emotional resonance. It's very much about giving you some kind of feeling. Turns out it's easier to distribute feelings like anger, resentment, hatred, jealousy, than it is cuteness, love, laughter, right? And that's simply a fact of our social life and our psychological life. And so not an intentional thing by these companies. They just designed their services to amplify the items that get the most reaction. It turns out we, being sinful animals, like to click on negative emotions and react to them and share them. And that's why, in this interaction between humans who have certain proclivities that we all try to fight to the best of our ability, and that's why everybody's here on a Sunday morning, right? To sort of limit the worst of our proclivities. And these services that are designed in a very flat way simply to get us to click on ads, right? So when you combine a service designed to keep you on to click on ads and human beings and all their complexity and faults, you get this turmoil, and that's where we are.
How are these, you mentioned algorithms, but AI algorithms. I've read a little bit about this, and I get every one of these platforms comes with an engagement algorithm.
Yes.
And how are they constructed, and can anybody change them?
Well, they can be changed from the inside, for one thing. They can be changed by the engineers and executives of these companies.
Not the end user.
No, the end user collectively we have influence on how these machines are shaped over time. If we all just clicked on the puppy pictures, then because these are machine learning algorithms, they would train themselves to basically serve us more puppies and fewer Nazis. And that would be lovely, but that's not where we are, right? So I'm trying. I put pictures of my puppy up all the time. It doesn't seem to make much of a difference. So yeah, there is a way in which what we call human-computer interaction at scale can shape the experiences of these machine learning systems. It's just happening in the opposite direction, largely at this point. Now, these companies could have designed their systems very differently, but their incentives were not toward maximizing puppies. Their incentives were for maximizing engagement in what they thought was a very neutral way. They wanted, when they designed these 20, 25 years ago, they wanted some assumption of neutrality, and what they got was, because we are not neutral, especially collectively, they got a much different outcome than they thought.
Yeah. How does artificial intelligence changing that or going to change that?
Well, so the things we call artificial intelligence now, first of all, that's basically a branding phenomenon right now. It builds upon what is an academic research area that was named in the 1950s and continues in computer science departments. But what we think of as artificial intelligence now, for most of us, are these large language models and image generators that are called generative artificial intelligence or generative AI that create, not really create, but mimic human creativity, right? By creating blocks of text as you queue them up, or new images or new videos out of a collection of old ones. Now, that's not actually what's happening in these systems. What's happening in these systems is a different form of machine learning. What they've done, and they've done this for nearly 20 years, so this is not new technology. They've designed systems that are constantly able to rewrite themselves. So the computers themselves are writing code for the computers. And that is especially how TikTok operates. So one of the reasons, and if you've ever used TikTok and compared it to like your Instagram experience, it's pretty clear that TikTok gets you really fast, like understands you like a psychic or something. Better than your own mother, I guarantee you, and feeds you a lot more of what you didn't even know you wanted. And it's so addictive because of that. I don't want to use addictive, that sounds clinical. I mean, it's so attractive because of that. And it's so much more effective at that than any of the previous platforms, including Instagram. That's one of the reasons why so many millions of people rushed to TikTok really fast. It's why Zuckerberg and the other companies freaked out about TikTok and have been trying to mimic it while also shutting it down in various countries. So TikTok mastered in ways that are completely hidden to us, a way to collect data about us in a really effective and efficient way and funnel it into predictive algorithms that learn from each other, both individually and collectively, and give us back more of what we want. And that's really powerful. It's the crack cocaine of algorithmic amplification.
When you say generative, is that something that a system that can actually teach itself?
The generative AI systems do teach themselves because there is a machine learning aspect within it. So when you are using like ChatGPT, and everybody's using ChatGPT, it's steadily learning from its mistakes. If you tell it that it made a mistake, it will bring that back into its library, into its system, and adjust slightly over time. So it is also constantly moving with the interaction. So one of the reasons they ran out ChatGPT to the public so early, long before it was any good, is they knew that it could not get better without making mistakes. So that's why they never apologize for the mistakes. Like, they make spectacular mistakes sometimes, as my students unfortunately found out. And they do that, but they did that to learn from the mistakes, right? They want us to go back and say, oh, ChatGPT is making all these mistakes. Because then the more we cite them that they made mistakes, the more we feed that back into the system, the better those systems respond, theoretically and over time. So like, they're willing to have us live among mistakes and errors to improve their system over time.
Well, GPT, as I understand it, stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer.
Right.
Which I guess is a way of saying you've got a computer that can teach itself.
Yes, but it only teaches itself because we are teaching it as well. Right. So it's always about the human and the computer together. It's one of the reasons whenever we talk about these issues, it's really important to avoid questions like, is it society or is it the machines? Or is it culture or is it technology? Because these are not separate phenomena, right? Technologies are part of culture. And in many ways, culture as we know it could not be transmittable without technologies, right? So, and our decisions, individually and collectively, shape how we use the technologies, how they're designed, how they're sold, how they're used, and how they're adapted to us. You can think about the the turntable, which for nearly a century turned in one direction at 33 1/3 revolutions per minute, and then at some point in the late 70s in the Bronx, somebody decided to move it the other way and actually create scratching rhythm out of a turntable and created a whole new musical form. And ever since then, turntables have been designed very differently to allow for, depending on what you buy, to allow for both functions, right? So that human shaping of technology is important to remember here. And we see that explicitly in any of these algorithmic systems where they depend on us to feed information and responses to these systems.
I'm going to switch gears for a minute. I want to ask you about Jonathan Haidt's new book.
Okay.
The name of the book, it's a bestseller. I think it's on the Times bestseller list. It's on the Post bestseller list. It's called The Anxious Generation, How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness. And I guess to distill the message, Haidt says that the rapid integration of smartphones and social media into daily life has transformed childhood and adolescence, leading to significant changes in how they develop socially and psychologically. Can you, you're a critic of Haidt's book.
I am. So, in short, he overstates the case. Jonathan used to teach at UVA. He used to live in Charlottesville. Our kids went to preschool together. I've known him for years. Been following his work for years. In his early work, he was a subtle and modest analyst of culture and psychology, and he's a what you might call a moral psychologist. He's a person who studies the generation of public morals from a psychological perspective. So he runs experiments to do that. It's fascinating work. He's moved away from that kind of lab-based experiment. He doesn't actually do his own experiments anymore. He does this sort of synthetic work now as a public intellectual. And a lot of his public intellectual work has great virtue. He's been one of the major voices for trying to sort of tone down the sharper edges of our public discourse to try to get us to be more civil and more responsive to people of different belief systems, for instance. So that's all very noble. His latest book, I think, moves into the area of fear-mongering and bombast. And I say that as a major critic of social media, right? I've written multiple books about the damage that is being done that I think has real evidence there. And most of the damage, that I see being done is in the world of our civic lives. And when I was writing first a book about Google and then a book about Facebook, my editors kept pushing me to look into the psychological, to talk about whether these systems are actually doing damage to our mood, doing damage to our personal relations, enhancing depression. Because there had been a lot of noise about that for some time. And I did, and I looked at the scholarship, and the scholarship was and remains inconclusive. On balance, when you look at the totality of the scholarship, we basically have no clear results about causality. And everybody who does that research and keeps trying to find those results will tell you the exact same thing. Inconclusive, 20 years of research, inconclusive. Doesn't mean that it might not be true. It doesn't mean it might not become more true later. It doesn't mean we can't maybe find better ways to measure it that show it's true. But so far, there is really, on balance, no clear evidence. So I never wrote about the psychological in either of my books after looking into it. And I am not a psychologist, so of course I treaded lightly into this. I did not want to come off pretending to be an expert on something I've never studied. That has not held Jonathan back. He has decided to go into the area of social media and not think about technologies, not think about the political economy of these systems from the point of view of, for instance, my field, but merely to cherry pick a few studies that seem to show that there is a direct correlation, and not necessarily, he jumps to causation, but really there are a few studies that show some correlation between excessive social media use and mental illness, specifically depression. Now, and that is very acute among young people. He ignores the fact that actually, population-wide, our mental health crisis is more acute among people in their 30s right now than teens. It's actually quite a serious emergency. But he's writing about teens, so let's not criticize him for the book he didn't write. So his book relies on 3 pillars, 2 of which are solid. And a stool with 2 pillars should fall over, right? But one of the pillars that I think is indisputable is that we have, over nearly 40 years, evacuated childhood in America of any sense of free, unsupervised play, right? And Jonathan and I are the same age. We had the same kinds of childhood. We lived it. We see it. We have kids the same age. We see the difference, right? And so today, for many, if not most Americans, childhood is highly structured, highly supervised, highly surveilled, and very rule-based. Lots more organized sports, lots more team sports, a lot less go out and play in the park and I'll yell for you at dinner time, right? And Haidt documents this. I don't think anybody really argues against the claim that this has been happening. And I think he makes a strong case, as others have, sociologists especially, that the evacuation of childhood of free play has limited children's ability to form social bonds outside of the gaze of adults, and therefore limited their ability to stumble, and limited their ability to forge the kind of social relations through trial, error, and sometimes heartbreak and pain that help you flourish as a young adult. And I think that's a really strong case. So that's pillar number 1. Pillar number 2 comes from that corollary of that, which is parenthood has become obsessive about safety in the absence of real evidence, right? So obsessive about making sure that children are outside the gaze of strangers, when in fact, strangers are not really a danger in any measurable way in America. Most children who are hurt by friends and relatives. And that's, like the home is really the most dangerous place for a child in America. But we're not going to stop homes, like teach them enough homes, right? But nonetheless, like if you are looking at the totality of the problem and how children are getting actually harmed and threatened, you're not looking in the right places if you're looking at parks and you're looking at rec centers and you're trying to close them down. And it's not like we're closing them down because of the danger, but our lack of interest in sending our children there is justifying the limitations of investment in the upkeep and expansion of these facilities where children would otherwise play outside of supervision. So that's number 2. The number 3 is the part that I have a problem with, which is that the mental health crisis, which is absolutely clear, absolutely true. We have a major mental health crisis among all age groups in America, but it is very acute among young people and perhaps most tragic among young people. He says it directly tracks with the timeline of the adoption of social media and smartphones, and precisely tracks with the amount of screen time and with social media use. And while those graphs do go up at the same rate, he doesn't want us to think about all the other things in children's lives that affect children. And that means all the other things in family life that have affected families. And if you think about the disruption and fear and frustration that we're still living with after the economic crash in 2008, when so many people lost their homes, when so many people lost their wealth, when so many people didn't know what their future held, and people lost some serious faith in the institutions of this country that we had grown up with for so long, including things like capitalism and democracy. And we're still living as adults in the aftermath of all of this. Of course, children feel that disruption and that stress. And of course, adults suffer for it. And when adults in a household suffer, the children suffer, right? You see increased substance abuse. We've had a massive spike in addiction problems, right? Opioid addiction problems, alcohol addiction problems, other sorts of problems. All of that affects children and, of course, disrupts their mental health as well. Then you have the pandemic, which we're still dealing with, right? We're still getting over that. And we still don't know what's next. And we don't know whether our government and our society is going to be able to handle the next pandemic in a better way than it did the last, right? So that, of course, took children basically out of school in many cases for a whole year, and sometimes more, disrupted their social bonds, put them on screens. And so what Haidt doesn't understand or ignores is that most of the studies about the connection between mental health and social media use show the opposite vector of causation. That the children most likely to be susceptible to self-harm, depression, and other maladies are more likely to seek solace, community, and mentorship outside of their immediate realm, because many of them don't know another person going through what they're going through. And you would imagine that LGBTQ young people especially feel this, and that's absolutely true. And so where are you going to find somebody who can help you through something? Where are you going to find someone who might understand what you're going through? Well, you're going to find it on your phone, because you're not finding it in the local youth center, because there is no local youth center. You're not finding it in the library, because the library's hours are shut down, right? Or you're not even encouraged to go to the library, right? So the phone is right there. The access to somebody who might lead you astray, but very much might help you is right there as well. And so the connection is really that children who are suffering the most then want to use their phone more and use social media more. Children who are doing well tend to find other ways to engage with the world. They spend more time studying, they spend more time in sports, they spend more time in houses of worship, they spend more time in other, I would think we all agree, more enriching activities than staring at your phone. And so this is where I think Haidt goes wrong, and it frustrates me that the simplicity of his argument is already changing policy in the absence of evidence, and I think in a way that is missing the point, because we have real problems with mental health in this country and actually around the world, and we're, by following Haidt down this road, not paying attention to the much harder, much more complex, and much more serious causes of the problem.
How do you deal with this? Is regulation a possibility? Is breaking up, you talk about a technopoly in your book.
Yeah. So antitrust is a potentially powerful area of law, and the Biden administration was very aggressive in challenging several of these companies based on their recent purchases of other companies, trying to limit competition. The principle being, if there were more competition in this area, then each company would have less political power, less money, and maybe less total influence on us. I think that antitrust is a necessary but insufficient response to this. Unfortunately, it looks like, because we're not going to have a Biden administration very much longer, we're probably not going to have these sort of aggressive antitrust attempts to break up companies like Amazon and Google, and maybe even Meta. They haven't really gone after Meta yet, but that was probably going to happen under Harris. But it's not going to happen now. So that's probably off the table. I think the more effective measure of potential regulation has to do with protecting our own data. It goes beyond saying privacy. It's about data protection. And Europe is way ahead of us on this. We have no laws in this country that protect our privacy with any rigor. We occasionally talk about privacy, and we have some court decisions that protect us from the gaze of the state, like what the police can and can't do with and without a warrant, what the FBI can do or the NSA can do with surveillance. But trust me, all of those are getting eroded now too. We barely have any of those privacy protections because our courts have turned against privacy in a serious way in recent years. And so is Congress. But in terms of protecting us from the exploitation of these companies, when they gather our data, when they measure not only what we click on, but where we are, like all these companies know exactly where you are right now if your phone's on, right? And they track you, and they know how much time you spend in this building every week. And they profile you based on it. And that's largely harmless if they're trying to sell you stuff. But anybody can buy that data on the open market. Anybody can buy data about any of your behaviors on the open market, including hostile foreign governments, and they do, including our government, which can be hostile to some Americans, and that happens. And we could limit the power of these companies and their ability to target stuff to us if we had strong data protection that allowed us to explicitly give permission to these companies to track us. We were kind of asked, the moment you signed up for Amazon the first time, you were given a long block of text and you agreed. The moment you signed up for Facebook or Instagram, same thing. Long block of text you never read and you agreed. It's on your cell phone contract too, you agreed. Turns out AT&T, Verizon, they're all tracking you too, right? And you agreed to it because who reads that? And you know what really, unlike how contracts used to work, like before the 21st century, you used to be able to amend a contract and initial it and send it back. Like both parties in the contract used to have equal negotiating power. Contract law has changed to the point now where it's just a click and you can't negotiate anything. And what are you going to do? Live without a cell phone? Good luck, right? So we basically have been pushed into an area of powerlessness by the law, by these changes in the law that have been mostly court-driven, but to some degree Congress-driven as well. And we really need to reverse that. We need to give us more power over our own data, over how we get used by these companies. Because right now it's largely invisible. Think about the changes that we've had in the credit card industry since the 2008 crash, largely because of people like Barney Frank and Elizabeth Warren, who have pushed for strong consumer protection. So that now when you sign up for a credit card, you get very in clear language what the consequences are. What are the consequences if I only pay my minimum payment? What are the fees? It's all in big numbers. What are the fees I pay if I'm late, right? All of that is in clear language. It didn't used to be. It used to be the really tiny print in 8 pages that would come with your initial credit card. And it's a simple thing to just give us the ability to understand how these systems are exploiting us and the ability to push back and opt out. And in credit cards, there's real competition. In social media, there is not. So some combination of antitrust and giving us the power would benefit us greatly. Unfortunately, again, all that's off the table for at least 4 years.
I want to ask you one other subject before we open it up for questions. I've always thought that social media makes it hard to think.
Oh, yeah.
To really think.
Yeah.
For deliberative thought. It's likes, it's emojis, it's a resentment machine, it's an anger machine,
Absolutely.
It's an affection machine. And that comes at a cost. Shallow discourse and polluted public discourse.
Absolutely.
So, Neil Postman was a mentor of his, right?
Yes.
Postman was an author, and I'm going to ask Siva to talk about him in a second. But he has a quotation from one of his books, which I think sums up pretty well where we are. When a population becomes distracted by trivia, when cultural life is defined as a perpetual set round of entertainments, when serious public conversation becomes a form of baby talk, when in short, people become an audience and their public business is a vaudeville act, sound familiar? Then a nation finds itself at risk. Culture death is a clear possibility.
Yeah.
What's a culture death?
Culture death, to Postman, and I think I agree with him, and I think you agree with him, is this notion that our worlds become small and flat. They become less rich, less playful, and they do so because we become passive. And we become less engaged with human beings in a multidimensional sense, right? And we also substitute what we think, and one of the important parts of this book, it's called Amusing Ourselves to Death. He wrote it in the 1980s, largely about television, but I think he was more right about the years he did not experience. He died in 2004, maybe 2003. So he died in 2004, the year that Facebook was created. And so he didn't get to see the Facebook era. He didn't get to see a reality television star become president of the United States. But believe me, that would have been a stirring final chapter of this book. Because he basically kind of predicts that if we go down this road of living through our boxes, then our public life and our creative life and our cultural life will become so impoverished that something that absurd is possible. And that's exactly what happened, right? And so he was prescient in that. Again, he was writing about television in the 1980s, a very different environment, right? A very different cultural, technological environment. And a lot of people love this book. It was a huge seller. It actually remains in print. We still teach it in universities. And it was terrifically influential. But it was also controversial because he had not made a slam dunk case in the 1980s. He was ahead of his time. He was ahead of the evidence a little bit. He wasn't wrong, he just wasn't as right as he would once be, and he became much more right after he passed away. And we should all be so lucky, right? Yeah, and the funny thing about Neil was he actually watched TV. I used to hang out with him. He was my first boss in academia. I was hired in at New York University by him. And we used to go to lunch, and one day at lunch, I was talking about how it was like, I had something coming up, like a speech, and I was nervous about doing well. And he said, I was watching this show called Behind the Music. And I know which you might remember, it was like on VH1. I don't know, like Neil Postman watched VH1. He was about 70 at the time, right? And he said, Donny Osmond was on there, and he was saying that for years he suffered from stage fright and anxiety until one day his wife said to him, "It's okay to do okay." I mean, this was this great little bit of wisdom from Donny Osmond to Neil Postman to me. I was like, oh, all right, that's pretty cool. And what are you doing watching Behind the Music? The guy who wrote music himself. But and part of his point was, we don't need to live without this stuff. There's pleasure there. Like, watch TV, enjoy it, but understand what it is and what it is not. And his biggest criticism was of news broadcasts. Because news broadcasts, even in those days, and we like to lionize the days of Walter Cronkite. This was written in the last days of Walter Cronkite. But the fact is, even under Walter Cronkite, news was designed as entertainment. You might remember the 1974 movie Network, which basically predicted that news would become entertainment, would become spectacular, would become all about indignation and anger and show business. And that was prescient. And so 10 years later, Postman writes this book where he says, look, that's what's happening. Look around, even in the very staid worlds of network news, we're seeing more and more of it shift toward small bits intended to dig at our emotions and not enrich our minds. And we kept going down that road, and now we are at the extreme end of it, and the results have been clear.
And I just finished with another quotation from Postman that I think is relevant. He says, I am saying something far more serious than that we are being deprived of authentic information. I'm saying we are losing our sense of what it means to be well informed.
Yes.
Ignorance is always correctable, but what shall we do if we take ignorance to be knowledge?
Exactly.
Seems like where we are.
Yes, exactly.
We have a few minutes for questions. I can't, is that?
Yes,
Hello.
Thank you so much for coming here. You seem incredibly knowledgeable, charismatic, and surprisingly optimistic, despite the fact that this is the environment that we're in. We're coming to the end of this book, ultimately all the predictions came true, so where are we going to be in a decade? TikTok's going to be out.
So, remember, I'm a Buffalo Bills fan, so I'm the wrong person to ask for predictions.
Or about optimism.
I'm eternally optimistic and always disappointed. Where are we going to be in a decade? Look, I can safely say only a few things. I can safely say that we are likely to continue our trend of stumbling into new technological environments and new technological products sold to us as matters of convenience. And I only say that we're likely to do that for 10 years because this isn't what we've been doing for at least 50 years. And that is continuously opting for convenience as our prime value, right? Our prime value, both as I would say as consumers, as workers, and as parents, like in so many of our functions, has been about making things more convenient and more efficient and doing more with our time with no concern about quality. Are we doing better things? Are we living better? Or are we just packing more into the waking hours? And are we even packing more into the waking hours? We're being sold more products to tell us we can pack more things into the waking hours. But are we even packing more things into the waking hours? So I'm fairly sure that in the larger texture of life, we are not in any danger of escaping that trap of continuously seeking more convenience. Think about what your phone does for you. The apps on your phone don't do anything for you that you could not do in 1980, 1990, or 2000. There's a banking app. You could have gone to the bank. There's a bookstore app. You could have gone to the bookstore. You know, you could even order books that would arrive in a week to the bookstore, even then, right? There are apps, multiple apps for you to talk to your friends and family. And in 1980, we could talk to our friends and family. It was a lot more expensive, but we could do it. We didn't lack the means. What it was, it took more steps to do it. You could do less of that in the day. So quantitatively, great advances, conveniently great advances. Now, I don't have to walk to my phone. My phone is with me all the time. It's actually over there, but it's with me all the time. I intentionally kept it over there, right? So all that has changed is the speed and texture of our activities. Our activities have not changed. Our needs have not changed. And the quality of our lives might or might not have changed. I think they've changed materially for some people. They've changed spiritually for some people. They've changed culturally for some people. But overall, are we living better because of these particular electronic computer technologies? The exceptions to how I would say that we are living better are in the area of medicine, in the area of engineering and safety, right? A lot of these computer technologies have made our cars safer, our airplanes safer, et cetera. And many of these technologies have extended the quality and duration of our lives. So in those areas of life, big wins. In the areas of how you and I live our daily lives, it's kind of a wash, except we now pour so much more of our attention and resources into these things so that we don't have to walk to the phone to talk to somebody. And we don't have to, arrange so much in life, right? So yeah, we can do more in life, but what are we doing? Well, we're supervising our kids more hours of the day, for one thing. And we're distracting ourselves. And so the question of deliberation, this gets to Postman's point as well, that I think we're losing is the notion of moments like this in rooms like this. This is a rare thing. It was never that common. Look, life has always been busy and taxing. When our ancestors worked on farms, this was a luxury that happened once a week as well. And not even for everybody, right? But look, this is a luxury, but this is also not about immediate gratification. No one is in this building on a Sunday for immediate gratification. That comes later when the Bills win. But, and then we'll beat the Rams. So for centuries we've been building these institutions meant to get us to step out of our natural inclination for immediate gratification and for convenience and speed and short-term pleasure. And so we built buildings like this, institutions like this, communities like this, universities, libraries, schools, Chautauquas, many other similar institutions to slow us down a little bit, to give us the opportunity to deliberate. And we've invested public and private money and time and effort in doing this. And we've trained people to help guide us through these things.